Well, the promise to bring down the wage bill is the thorny issue. Kusatu says the finance minister's decision to cut the public wage bill is a huge disaster. The union said it was the first time it had heard of such a drastic step. This after Mboweni announced a 160 billion rand drop in costs for public bodies, which will form the bulk of savings anticipated to be 260 billion rand.
It's an extreme act of bad faith and poor negotiations by government to yesterday to indicate to us they want to withdraw from this year's agreement. So as far as Labour is concerned, we can't withdraw from it. We're willing to discuss next year and the following 3 years agreements. We're willing to put compromise on the table. Areas we think we can save, reduce the fat, etc. But we can't negotiate in good faith that governments can sign an agreement and afterwards seek to run away from it.
Well, we have been focusing on the budget speech inside Parliament today, but outside groups marched through the Cape Town CBD and congregated at the gates under the banner of Cry of the Excluded, demanding that government deals with the growing unemployment crisis. Others called on the finance minister to stop government investing in fossil fuels. That protest was organised by 350 Africa. To discuss, we're joined by 350 Africa team leader Glenn Tyler Davies. Glenn, thank you for joining us remotely. How did your protest go today in Cape Town?
Good evening, Francis. Thanks for having me on the show. It went well today. We were gathered outside Parliament to send a message to Tito Mboweni, the Finance Minister, to say that we need to stop investing money from public finance institutions like the Industrial Development Corporation and the DBSA. We need those institutions to make a public commitment to not fund fossil fuels, but instead we need them to put money into funding a just transition to renewable energy. So that was our message today, and we had a diverse number of people, diverse group of people outside Parliament to demand that from Finance Minister Mboweni.
Yeah, what were your numbers like? One report suggested 30. Were you disappointed more people weren't standing there with you?
Absolutely. I think climate change is such a crucial issue. We really do try to mobilize as many people as possible. But I think what is encouraging is in the other march that you mentioned, the Cry of the Excluded, one of their key demands is for 1 million climate jobs. And I think it's this crucial coming together of workers, unemployed people and environmentalists to show that, in addressing climate change, there are many opportunities. For instance, to create jobs, to create climate jobs, jobs in renewable energy and in other sectors of the economy. So I think those two groups coming together is really important, and I was really encouraged by what I saw today on the streets of Cape Town.
The finance minister today did talk about the money that will be raised from the carbon tax, which is a tax on car emissions. He also repeated what the president said about renewable energy. Municipalities will be able to buy power from those renewable energy producers. Were you happy with those?
I think we noted the carbon tax, the finance minister hailing the carbon tax and the income from the carbon tax. Unfortunately, the tax as it stands is woefully inadequate in terms of raising enough money or, putting the pressure on actors to actually change their behavior. Because what we're wanting to see is a carbon tax that makes it increasingly hard for companies especially to emit carbon, and so that they actually start to behave their way, change their ways of doing business. So I think that tax needs to be raised. It needs to start sort of really feeling companies need to start feeling the pinch from the carbon tax so that they actually change their behavior into low carbon forms of economy and business. In terms of municipalities being able to get power from independent power producers, I think this is a fantastic step. It's really good, and also the finance minister said that phase 5 or the 5th round of the independent power producers bids was also announced. I think that's really positive. However, these are small steps in terms of addressing a really huge problem like climate change. We've seen reports from the UN Framework Convention of Climate Change. They had a special report last year which really shows that any decrease in warming that we can bring about is very, very important. I mean, it really there are literally lives on the line, and we can see that through the impacts of climate change and what climate change has done in South Africa. So I think if we can, these small steps are great. Municipalities being able to buy renewable energy straight from power producers, fantastic, especially if they can afford that. We know that's also an issue that we're dealing with. But I think what we really want is a visionary plan for a just transition to renewable energy. That's what we're pushing for. And I think, increasingly other groups, like I've mentioned, Labour, are starting to see this as something that's an imperative for South Africa, not only for our own economy, but also in terms of our future, in terms of having a livable planet to live on. We need to decrease our carbon emissions, and we really need some big thinking to do that.
Do you welcome the increase in the plastic bag levy that goes up to 25 cents?
Absolutely. I think plastic bags obviously come from fossil fuels. Plastic is formed from fossil fuels. So if we're producing less plastic, that's a good thing. I think that is a rather small issue in the bigger issue of climate change, however. It's definitely to be welcomed, but I think, again, there needs to be much bigger steps taken to really change the systems that are producing the carbon emissions. We need to start keeping fossil fuels in the ground. That's something that we didn't hear from the finance minister at all. And again, coming back to these public finance institutions, like some banks already have made commitments in terms of not funding coal production, we really need to see fossil fuels across the board decrease, and we need to see those fossil fuels, the coal, oil and gas, remain in the ground.
All right, thank you very much. That was Glenn Tyler Davies from one of the groups organising a protest outside Parliament today, 350 Africa.